Chapter 6. Nicholas ran up the palace stairs, the clatter of his boots echoing across the empty gardens. "Lotho," he gasped to the house goblin who stood at the door. "Where's the queen?" Shocked by the sight of his master's flushed face and gleaming eyes, Lotho stammered. "Her Majesty is in the nursery, Your Majesty." Nicholas ran toward the staircase, calling back over his shoulder, "Get the dragons up! I want the dragons flying over the palace. Tell Melchior." "Wait, Nicholas! We must get Holly now! This instant!" It was Sophia, her hair streaming behind her like silver water. As she skimmed toward him, her feet scarcely touching the smooth floor, Nicholas saw, for the first time in his 1,000-year memory, an expression of alarm on her face. The sight of it was enough to set his heart thumping. He nodded and dashed up the stairs. The hall of mirrors was dark and silent now, and the glowing candles that emerged from the walls to light their way could hardly keep up with the two figures racing toward the nursery. They burst through the doors, their ragged breath sounding harsh in the quiet, moonlit room. A small fire crackled in the fireplace, but it took a moment before they perceived Viviana's figure standing still, as though she had just jumped in surprise. Her wide eyes were staring into a dark corner of the room. Dreading what he was to see, Nicholas followed her gaze. In the first seconds, it was only a thin outline, a few sharp dashes in the gloom, but then it began to take shape. The edges of the robe, the glint of dull iron, and the gaunt, rigid face seemed to assemble themselves from a cloud of flea-colored particles. Heracon stepped forward, his narrow eyes clicking from one horrified face to the next. "How charming to find you here, Sophia," he said, his tongue jutting rhythmically from his mouth. "I have so been looking forward to our reunion." Sophia's eyes slid away from his, down to the fleecy bundle that lay in the cradle. With a quick movement, she lunged toward the baby, encircling her arms around the soft blankets. She drew back, preparing to flee. Heracon hissed his laughter. "Oh, my dear, have you forgotten that love and fear can go hand in hand?" He flicked his hand toward her, and she froze into a living statue, with Holly in her arms. "I always knew when you were frightened, particularly when you were frightened of me." He loomed over her with a gloating smile. "You too, fool," he whispered, paralyzing Nicholas with a wave of a finger. "How entrancing to find you all so terrified. Makes everything much simpler than I expected, I must say. And now, little, what's your name?" he muttered, drawing a small, hide-covered box from the folds of his robe. "I brought you a present. Daddy's not the only one who brings presents to good little girls," he cooed, flipping open the box to reveal a small, strange object. It was transparent, gelid, cunningly made. It was a heart of hardened snow. "I suppose," said Heracon, looking with distaste at the squirming bundle, "that I shall have to handle you myself." Gingerly, he lifted Holly from Sophia's frozen arms, laid her upon the floor, and began to unwrap her blankets. The baby lay in her nightgown, looking curiously up at the hollow eyes fixed upon her. Heracon shook himself. All that was left to do was frighten her thoroughly. His gray lips flattened as he watched Holly's light eyes dance over them. Then he opened his black mouth wide and screamed, high and shrill, his rotting breath hot on her cheeks, his jaws distended and his narrow eyes bulging. Holly's face crumpled. She gave a little mew of fear and pressed back against the cold floor, her tiny arms flailing weakly through the air. Nicholas, imprisoned in his frozen shell, felt part of his soul turn dark with rage. "Perfect, my dear," purred Heracon, busily extracting the snow heart from its container. "Splendid." Holding the mass between his thumb and forefinger, he reached toward her. Somehow her soft gown seemed to dissolve around his fingers, and before her parents' horrified, helpless gazes, he pressed the ice-cold heart deep into her chest, his fingers disappearing into her flesh, and then emerging clean, holding nothing. The weak cries stopped. Surprised into silence by the cold new center of herself, Holly lay still. Heracon watched her searchingly for a moment and then stood, a twisted smile cracking across his face. That should suffice. Your heart is encased. All its purity and compassion will be preserved, he spat, until you are fully grown and ready to be married. To me. He cast a contemptuous glance at Holly. But don't get above yourself, miss, for you are nothing but a vessel, a squirming vessel that will eventually become useful to me. I regret to inform you that I am unmoved by our engagement. He bowed. And if I could throw you from that window to the stone terrace below without losing my chance at freedom, I would do so immediately, just for the sake of the expression on your daddy's face, my future bride. Heracon laughed, thinking of it, and prodded the baby with his scaly toe. However, self-control is my watchword now, isn't it, my dear? And I shall simply make do with the expression on your father's face right now. He flicked his fingers, 1, 2, 3, toward Nicholas, Viviana, and Sophia. Freed, the three flew to Holly and lifted her from the cold floor, cuddling her and comforting her. Viviana covered the little face with kisses and tears, pressing gently on her small limbs to reassure herself that her daughter was still whole. Nicholas bent over the tiny figure in his wife's arms, his eyes filled with tears. Sophia was the first to recover. She rose slowly to her feet and fixed her wide black eyes on Heracon's icy gray ones. So filled with disgust was her look that the warlock took an uncertain step backward. You can't do anything to me, he said shrilly. I'm immortal. You think I wish to kill you? She said, smiling. I will let you do that yourself. She took a step toward him. A fine godmother you are, Heracon said, licking his dry lips nervously. You didn't offer much in way of protection tonight, did you? I cursed her and you just stood there. I did not know which curse you would choose until it was too late, Sophia said, stepping closer, her eyes still on his. Does that make you feel powerful? I am powerful, he protested, his voice rising. I got here, didn't I? I brought fear to the land of immortals, didn't I? And you just froze, you and that fool they call king. Nicholas looked sharply up from Holly, his mouth curling in contempt. Oh yes, give me your regal look, screamed Heracon. But you didn't act like much of a king tonight, did you, Nicky? I shut your whole country down, and if you think it's over, you're even more of a fool than I thought, because I will win. He pointed a claw-like finger at Holly, held close in Viviana's arms. I'll have her heart, and then I'll be free, and then I'll grind this place to dust under my heel. Wisdom is never without power, Sophia replied. You know that the child must choose to go with you of her own free will. I'll crush her will, he retorted quickly. In due time, I'll crush her will completely, and then she'll be mine without a murmur. Sophia shook her head. Love will prevail, Heracon, just as it always has. I remember one time that it didn't, the warlock snapped. Now, I'd love to stay and relive our past, my dear, but I must be on my way. My birds need feeding, he snickered with a glance toward Nicholas. Nicholas rose slowly. Get out, he said in a low voice. Get out before I'm tempted. He raised one arm. With a little bark of terror, Heracon spun himself frantically and dissolved into a cloud of flea-colored particles that swirled into nothingness. Nicholas stood staring at the faint greenish ring of mucilage that the warlock had left behind. Mucilage that the warlock had left behind. Nicholas, there's something wrong with Holly, cried Viviana. She's pale and gasping. Take off those blankets, ordered Sophia, flying to her side. Quickly, they stripped off the cozy blankets that Viviana had just finished wrapping around the baby. With each layer they removed, Holly seemed to breathe more easily. And when she lay once again, clad only in her thin gown, the glow returned to her cheeks. In a few moments, she was gurgling companionably toward the ceiling above her head. "What happened?" Viviana asked Sophia. The goddess looked suddenly tired. She sat down rather heavily on a soft chair. "Her heart is made of snow now," she began. "You saw it happen. It will beat like our hearts, keeping Holly alive, provided it remains cold, frozen, as a matter of fact. It is imperative that the snow remains frozen, for if it melts, Holly will die." Nicholas and Viviana stared at her in horror. "I'm sorry, my friends. There's no other way to tell you. What happened just now is an example of what will happen if Holly is too warm. Her heart will soften and skip. She will grow weak and faint and gasp for air. Rest easy," she comforted them. "Holly does not feel the cold upon her skin. To her it is now comfortable and comforting to live in a frozen world. But you must take care. No blankets, no fires, no heat should touch her. It is probably," Sophia surveyed the room, "too warm for her still, but I can change that." She searched in her robes and found a thin gold rod. With it, she gestured in a broad arc across the ceiling, and snow suddenly swirled from all sides, cloaking the floor in sparkling crystals. Viviana shivered. "Yes, it's cold, but you will grow used to it, and, as you can see, Holly finds it delightful." The baby was kicking her hands and feet in an ecstatic tattoo, her eyes dancing at the shower of rainbows that fluttered around her. Under her parents' anxious eyes, Holly grew rosier as the temperature dropped, until, finally, covered only in her light gown and a gauze of snowflakes, she fell asleep. Nicholas, Viviana, and Sophia talked far into the night, laying plans for the frozen world that was necessary for Holly's survival. After Viviana fell asleep, exhausted by a day that had begun in rejoicing and ended in sorrow, Sophia and Nicholas talked on. "How could I have let it happen?" he groaned remorsefully. "If only I hadn't let myself fear him, he would have been powerless." Sophia's keen eyes rested on his face. "The day that Holly was born, you changed. You are a father first, and an immortal second. Tonight you feared, as a father fears, for the safety of his child. But oh, the damage that has been done! The land of the immortals has never before known fear. But now it does, and yet it will survive," Sophia said. "Perhaps that is the lesson that the elders wish us to learn." "Us? You too, Sophia?" "Yes, Nicholas, I will be learning alongside you." "What do you mean?" "I cannot go home now." She paused, searching for a way to soften her words. "I cannot go home until this darkness lifts." Then Nicholas understood. "Oh, no, no, not a curse, not here," he said, and he dropped his face into his hands. The square of the Sibyls looked very different than it had 24 hours earlier. It was still thronged with immortals, the same immortals who had cheerfully crowded together to see the little princess emerge from the cathedral. But now their eyes were fixed in consternation on Nicholas, who stood in the center of their cluster. His golden crown was the only touch of warmth under a sky filled with harsh gray clouds. The crystal buildings that lined the square seemed different too, their luster gone, a dark outline of shadow etched around each wall and sloping roof, as though something were pressing against each surface. The immortals shivered, not only because of the frigid wind that scoured the square, but also under the burden of Nicholas's words, decreed that if any of our citizens should come under the curse of an immortal, our country must thenceforward be closed until the curse be lifted. Nicholas cleared his throat. "What that means, friends, is that we cannot leave, and, I'm sorry to say, our visitors cannot leave either." Anxious whispers broke out. "And I won't keep the worst of it from you, immortals," Nicholas continued. The very worst part is this. No new souls may enter our land until the curse is lifted. He looked at the ground. What? What about the souls that deserve immortality? Where would they go? Why? Several called. I don't know. It's never happened before, and I don't know where the new souls will go. And as for why, I can only say that it is the law of the elders, and that's all. But how can the curse be lifted? Shouted Zenweiler the centaur, ready for combat. I don't know, Nicholas repeated helplessly. We will learn that together. Sophia stepped forward. Holly and Holly alone can lift the curse that rests on her head. I have faith that she will. Nicholas glanced gratefully at his old friend. Yes, of course. She is a remarkable child. She has wisdom and strength. This is only temporary, I'm certain of it. What about Christmas? Called one of the goblins who had worked in Nicholas's North Pole performance. I believe that I will be allowed to make my usual journey around the world on Christmas Eve, Nicholas explained. The mortals must not be deprived of their happiness. But some of them are being deprived of their trusted helpers, said a wizard who advised a young, rather flighty mortal king. The immortals nodded glumly, and several fairies folded their wings. Just for a short time, I'm certain of it, Nicholas said again. Silently, the immortals stared back at him. In their eyes, he saw devotion, sympathy, loyalty, pity, and something he had never seen before. Reproach. Chapter 7.